the political landscape had assumed the shape it would retain until the rise of ancient Rome. The Ptolemies were in control in Egypt, the Seleucids controlled Syria and Babylon, and Macedon Cassander ruled, but the descendants of both Antipater and Antigonus would vie for control of that throne all the way down until the Roman conquest. Now, these men were ruling as nominal governors of the Argead kings. Now, the final break with the old order came in 310 BCE with the death of Alexander IV. And Alexander IV was the last male dynast of the Argead dynasty. With him, the dynasty comes to an end. Alexander IV's death was just really a bit of house cleaning for the Diadochi. They had spent the past 13 years since the death of Alexander III, vying with one another for supremacy, and they neglected the boy king, who was now 13, and he was rapidly approaching the age of majority. In 2 or 3 years, he would be able to legitimately dismiss all of these, and they were still using the guys governors. In 2 or 3 years, he would be able to legitimately dismiss all of these governors, or simply campaign against them using his father's name. And again, we have to remember that they had not made any attempts to link themselves to the local populations. The local population was still going under the assumption that they were being ruled by governors appointed by the Argead king. So if the Argead king wages war against these governors, then the reasonable expectation would be that the local population would join in with the king's effort to punish these rebel governors that the local populations have no interest in supporting, or the local population would simply stay out of the affairs and allow the rebel governors and the royal dynasty to duke it out themselves. Now, at this time, at the time of his death, there were some in Macedon who were calling for Alexander IV to be granted command of his kingdom. His uncle, Philip III, he had died back in 317 BCE, so it was only Alexander IV. He was the sole king, and there were many looking for him to step into the shoes and assume the mantle of awesome responsibility the way his grandfather and his father had. Now, in the agreement of 311 BCE, Cassander would guarantee to rule in Macedon until Alexander IV came of age. Lysimachus kept Thrace, Ptolemy kept Egypt, Antigonus kept Asia, and the Greek cities were granted a greater degree of autonomy. A continuation of the traditional partition and confirmation of provinces by the Macedonian aristocracy by these new Hellenistic dynasts that was firmly in place. It was firmly assumed that this type of dance would happen. Now, 4 years after the death of Alexander IV, the Diadochi proclaimed themselves in quick succession, and this was done in a very sort of like copycat manner. One king was referred to, one of the aristocrats was referred to as a king. And so all of his rivals, all of his contemporaries, they very quickly began to refer to themselves as kings, so that they would be seen as lesser to their aristocratic rival, their aristocratic now dynastic rival. And of course, a part of the great legacy of Alexander and his family would be the cities, and of course their great libraries. The city of Alexandria in Egypt was to become a center of learning. It became home to the most famous library of the ancient world, the Library of Alexandria, and this library was famed or infamous for the goal of collecting one copy of every book in the world. Every ship that came to the city was searched. Not for illegal goods, not for weapons, not for seditious libel, but for books. If the book was not one currently held at the library, it was confiscated, copied, and returned. And they did not return the book to you. They returned a copy of the book to you. Now, the library also contained a museum. And a museum, in the original Greek meaning, was simply a home for the muses. Now, the museum served as a repository for interesting artifacts, in addition to being a think tank for scholars, inventors, and of course philosophers. Now, Alexandria soon attracted a number of scholars from around the ancient world, and mainly the ancient Greek world, who used the library and the museum to have research basis while writing reports on their own studies and theories. And the Ptolemaic kings, they funded this library and they used it as a social mechanism, has a social tool to one up their Macedonian aristocratic slash Hellenistic dynasty rivals. The other kings, not to be outdone, founded libraries of their own, and they shifted their rivalry from the battlefield to academia and to trade and to other social spheres. Now, the other libraries came close to, but they did not really match the Library of Alexandria in terms of greatness. This lecture, I think, is one of the longest that I've done in a while. I think only the lectures on the 7 Years' War and the Imperial Breakdown in the American history, the U.S. history lecture series went longer. But hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you thought about this lecture. And I am Ted, and I will see you guys next time for another lecture.